Hey everybody, Miss Cross here, and we are covering part one of the Age of Jackson today. So you should have some guided notes handy, and I'm going to take you through the notes, maybe a little bit faster than we would in person. So feel free to pause the video as you need to fill in your blanks, and then continue. The presentation that goes with this video may not immediately be available because we're having to do the presentation in a couple parts. However, you can always come back to the video for the PowerPoint slides that you need. So we're going to start in the context. Again, I told most of my classes that we are sort of getting away from the chronological pattern of studying history currently, and we're focusing on the first half of the 19th century by theme. So we're starting on the rise of Andrew Jackson and talking about several things that are going on at the time. And by the 4th of July, 1826, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson pass away on the same day, Independence Day, within hours of each other. And it symbolizes that America's revolutionary generation is largely gone. And there are new leaders and new political parties taking center stage. Another event that's going on in the first, couple decades of the 19th century is a second Great Awakening. Very similar to the first Great Awakening, it's a Protestant religious movement that sort of begins in New England and spreads all around the country with themes of rejecting the doctrine of predestination. So suddenly people are rejecting the fact, or the idea, I should say, that God predetermines everyone's salvation, and instead that people can obtain salvation through transforming their lives and committing good works. So through that idea process, we see new denominations forming. This is where Baptists and Methodists were created. And there's a connection to this religious movement to Jacksonian democracy because the Great Awakening is this great equalizer, that everyone has this chance to gain salvation from God. People are becoming more invested in religion and doing good things, just like Jackson makes politics a great equalizer. So, the Second Great Awakening sort of organizes a religious and educational infrastructure on the frontier with the idea that anyone can be saved and everyone is equal in God's eyes and can obtain salvation. You're going to learn about 3 Supreme Court cases in this unit. 3. We've only done 1 in school all year, so brace yourselves. All 3 of these cases see this man as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's John Marshall. He will sit for 34 years as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and will really truly shape our nation in the judiciary branch with several legal precedents. He is a Federalist, and so he tends to promote Federalist ideals, things that typically support a strong central government. He promotes this a concept of resolution where the judicial branch makes decisions, and he rules a lot often on this concept of supremacy, which means who is in charge. So our first case, this is a quick summary, is McCulloch versus Maryland, occurs in 1819. And basically, this is a case about the federal government versus individual states and their balance of power. By the end of this case, Chief Justice John Marshall has affirmed or upheld federal supremacy, that if a state and the federal government clash, the federal government wins. So in this case, the clash was about the Second Bank of the United States. The state of Maryland attempted to impede the Second Bank or interfere with the federal bank by imposing a tax on all banknotes that were not chartered or created in Maryland. And then James McCulloch happened to be the head of the bank at the Baltimore Ranch. So that's why his name is included on the case. So it's like Maryland versus James McCulloch, who is the head of the bank in Baltimore. Chief Justice John Marshall ended up saying that states cannot tax federal institutions. So in that case of clashing, where the state tried to interfere by taxing the federal bank, that was unconstitutional. So it means that the federal institution has supremacy. And in addition, he says that Congress has the authority to create the bank, even though it's not expressly stated in the Constitution. Because the national bank was something the nation needed, they could create it and legislate on it thanks to the Elastic Clause in the Constitution. Another case where Chief Justice John Marshall rules in 1824 is Gibbons versus Ogden. Now, this case has to do with interstate trade. Just like interstates are highways that travel inter or between states today, rivers were the original interstates back in the 19th century. So the power to regulate trade is granted to Congress by the Constitution. There's a whole clause called the Commerce Clause. And this case has to do with the fact that there was a New York state law that granted a monopoly on the Hudson River of trade, like a steamboat monopoly, to certain steamships that were on the Hudson River, which flows in between New York and New Jersey. So, as that being interstate trade, should have been regulated by Congress and not the state of New York. So basically, in the end, Chief Justice John Marshall held that federal law supersedes or beats state law. And we'll study more details of Gibbons v. Ogden soon. All right, now a recap of the presidential election of 1824. Thank you to everybody who did a great job on this election work on Asynchronous Friday last week. But basically, in 1824, Andrew Jackson had become very popular after the War of 1812, giving him the ability to run for president against John Adams, who is seeking re-election. This is John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams' second president. In 1824, you can see there are other competitors in that election, and as a result, no one won the necessary majority in electoral votes. And so when that happens, the House of Representatives votes a winner among the top two recipients, which would have been John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. The deciding factor in the House happened to be a congressman from Kentucky. His name is Henry Clay, and he convinces the House of Representatives to choose John Quincy Adams over Andrew Jackson. So Clay endorses Adams, and Adams gets the victory. Why did Henry Clay endorse John Quincy Adams? Only because Adams agreed to make him Secretary of State if he gets elected president. And so they made this deal behind closed doors, and people suspected, once John Quincy Adams won and Clay became Secretary of State, everyone kind of realized that that's kind of had been what happened, that Clay didn't really endorse Adams because he thought that he was the better candidate, but to really further his own agenda. But that didn't really matter. 1824 election came and went. John Quincy Adams wins, and the event is called the Corrupt Bargain. It's occurring to me as I'm stating this. This was not John Quincy Adams' re-election. This is his first time in office. Terribly sorry. He is a former Secretary of State, so he's been in politics, but in 1824 is the first time John Quincy Adams runs for president. And he does beat Andrew Jackson. Sorry. 1828 is his re-election. Meanwhile, nice pretty landscape of what America may have looked like back in the 19th century, or at least an artist depiction that shows a little bit of city, a little bit of agrarian, a lot of river transportation, commerce, landscaping, art was very popular in this century as far as famous bits of art from this time period. But anyway, America is changing fast in the early 1800s. Large-scale factories are replacing the small workshops of the North, and family farms are giving way to large cotton plantations of the South. So we're seeing some big cultural changes. High wealth is being concentrated among fewer people, and ordinary Americans tended to believe that the wealthy, the top few percent, were tightening their grip on power in government and in the United States. Small farmers, frontier settlers, and slaveholders supported Andrew Jackson. They believed he would defend the rights of common people and slave states. Democracy is also expanding in the 1820s. Democracy meaning the right to participate in government. More Americans are getting the right to vote in this time period. But as you know, up until this point, to be a voter, you had to be a white male property owner. In the 1820s, many states, including Tennessee, are eliminating the property ownership requirement for men to be eligible to vote. So more men became active in politics. They created campaign groups that rallied support for Andrew Jackson while digging up dirt on John Quincy Adams and exposed this information to the public. That's called mudslinging. Both political parties are holding local and national nominating conventions, which allow their party members, and not just their party leaders, to select candidates for different offices. So, not just the presidency, but local governing groups. This period of expanding democracy in the 1820s and 1830s is called Jacksonian democracy. Again, expanding the right to vote because many states are eliminating the property ownership requirement. All right, here's our rematch in 1828. Thomas Jefferson's old Democratic Republican Party is split into Democrats and Whigs. Democrats were followers of Andrew Jackson, who supported and who opposed the privileged elite establishment in order to offer affordable Western land to ordinary white Americans. Native Americans needed to be forced off their lands. So that's kind of their platform. The Whigs are John Quincy Adams supporters, typically advocating for support for economic improvements as the best route to sustained prosperity. Andrew Jackson was the first presidential candidate, quote, from the woods, meaning west of the Appalachian Mountains. He's portrayed as a war hero who had been born poor and worked to succeed, while the nation had become corrupt by elitist aristocrats. John Quincy Adams was a Harvard graduate and son of the second president, the very elitist aristocrat that Jackson's party attacked. With expanded voting rights, more, quote, common men related to Andrew Jackson and showed up to vote. So with a record number of voters, Jackson took the presidency from John Quincy Adams in 1828. And here you can see the results of the electoral vote and the popular vote. Quincy Adams receiving most of his support from New England, Jackson from the South and the West. Jackson's inauguration is pretty famous for being a riotous event. As you can see him sort of center right in the picture, and all sorts of frontier Southern and Western folk coming into the Capitol building and living it up. Jackson's victory in the election of 1828 ushers in what we call a new era of politics. Jackson was a self-made man who declared education an unnecessary requirement for political leadership. Jackson supported a thing called the spoils system, which still exists today. You see, Jackson thought there were too many career politicians walking the streets of Washington. He felt that these people had lost touch with the real public, so he rewarded his political backers with government jobs, and that's called the spoils system. From the quote, "To the victor belongs the spoils of war." He thought this system was more democratic. Not that that person was more qualified for the job than anyone else, but someone who could relate to the public more and to sort of get rid of career politicians in Washington. Martin Van Buren also steps onto the scene. He's going to be one of Jackson's closest advisors and a member of Andrew Jackson's kitchen cabinet. Now, a kitchen cabinet is not Andrew Jackson's official cabinet of advisors, but more like an informal group of advisors who sometimes met in the White House kitchen. All right, that's where we're going to stop with part 1. Pick up with part 2 in the next video.